Okay, why don't we go ahead and get started. Again, thank you for attending our Friday Insight session. Today we're going to talk about what we're calling digging into the details about a metric in Stratum. Show you a technique that you can use to accomplish that. Typically when we talk about drilling into data and drilling and slicing and that kind of stuff in Viewer, we're really centered around dimensions, going from maybe a high-level dimension like a product category or group, and maybe drilling then into products and looking at a product and going into customers, sold to, shipped to, things like that. So really oriented around dimensions primarily. But what we want to talk about today is how you can drill into more information about a particular metric. Maybe there's an amount field, dollars sold, units, cases, things like that. A couple different ways you can do that. You can include that kind of detail information into one view and just have a really large view with a lot of columns in it that breaks down that information that you want to see all in one view. But another technique, and what we're going to talk about today, is how you can start and provide your user or a view that you create for yourself or a user, how you can start at a higher level and look at some information and determine whether or not you want to drill into more detailed information about that particular metric. And you can do that really, both take advantage of both more measures. For example, you may have a cost measure. Well, that cost measure may be actually an aggregate or a summation of more detailed costs, material costs, labor, overhead, landed costs, et cetera, et cetera. So at a high level, maybe you just want to see how the cost is relative to an average or your expected cost for a product or a customer. And if something looks a little out of whack, you can then look at the specific details about that particular measure and get more detailed, in this example, cost information. So we do that by having in Viewer a high level, or what I would call a summary view, and then providing a mechanism, a link, to drill into and to spawn, if you will, another view within Viewer that gives you the detailed information. Viewer being a web-based application uses URL addresses. And because of that, we can set up a link that takes us from one view to another view. And with that link, we can also pass information as parameters. So we'll get into all of that. So again, I've got what I would call a base or summary view, and giving me the information, kind of key information. And we can utilize what we call a calculated measure within Viewer to then set up a link to the detail view. And that detail view then has more detailed information about the particular metrics or dimensions or whatever that I want to see more information about from the summary level. Now these views, there's nothing special about the views themselves. They're just classic, standard Stratum Viewer views. But we're going to take advantage of some of the features within a calculated measure that allows you to link these views together. And as I mentioned before, that link mechanism is achieved using a calculated measure. And there are a number of components within a calculated measure of the measure item properties, which I show over here on the right-hand side there. There's a lot of different parameters or properties rather that you can utilize, and you can put them into different combinations of things just depending on what you want to show to the user and what you want to be able to link between the summary view and the detail view. So just running down some of the different properties that are available on the calculated measure window that can be utilized to do this. One, type, obviously it's a calculated measure. Two, the expression. Now the expression can be just a standard expression like you would use in a normal view, where in this case we're doing a percent of change calculation between two other measures in the view. So I can actually do that calculation. It could also be, and I'll show you an example of this when we go to the demo environment, it could be the specification of an actual icon or image that you want to have displayed in that column. And I'll show that as well. The value parameter, or property rather, do you want to see the value of that calculation or expression in the view when you actually run the view? In this case, we've got it set to no, and I'll show you a couple examples of that. Image, I mentioned it before. In the expression, I can use the expression to indicate the location and the specific object that I want as the image to be displayed, and that's what will appear in the view. So that's one way to indicate to the end user who's using the view, here's an icon that I can click on to link to the detail view. The other way to do it is you can use a conditional format, and I'll show you how to use that. That's a nice way of doing it as well. The pop-up expression, again, that's something that we use as you hover over a column or a value within a view. This gives the user information. So it can be information about the status of that particular measure. It could describe an action that's going to happen. If I click on this, this is what's going to happen. So it's just information that we give over to the user, provide to the user. And then finally the hyperlink. And obviously to link from one view to another, we select that as a yes, and then we go into setting up the URL address that allows us to execute or display another view. So the hyperlink syntax, there's certain components that you need to provide. Certainly, the first one, the server address. This is the standard where viewer is installed. So what the server name is and the port number, and then slash the executable, if you will, the view window.aspx. That's the actual ASP page that is used to run and display the view itself. So that's the first portion. The second piece is the actual view ID of the detail view that you want to link to. So in this case, it happens to be 7026. So as we list out the entire hyperlink expression, that'll be one of the components there, where you've got the question mark, view ID equals, and then the actual ID. And that can be found, that view ID can be found in a couple places. One, if you have admin rights into looking at all the views, over on the very right-hand column, there'll be a view ID for that particular view that you're looking at. Or as you're editing the view itself, up at the main view node, if you will, you can find the view ID as well. And then the final piece of the hyperlink is the parameters that you want to pass. And this is optional. You could just click on something and then display another view. In these particular examples that we're going to look at, we're actually going to pass information from the existing view that we're looking at over as parameters into the detail view. And so we'll show you how that all works. A couple key things here. When we're creating that detail view, we're going to set up the parameters or parameter group, just like we do when we want to create a parameter group and prompt the user for information inputs in order to run that detail view. Same mechanism. But what's important when we talk about the hyperlink and the syntax is the parameter name that we use in the link has to be exact. So it obviously has to be spelled exactly the same. But if it's all caps, it needs to be in all caps. Very important there. And then the other key portion of the syntax, and this is where we really get to where we're transferring the information from one view and passing the value as a parameter to another view, is down here at the bottom where it says value. So in my view, in this particular example, I may be displaying plant information. And I have my various plants that are being displayed. And maybe I want to get information about a specific plant. So I click on the row that contains that particular plant member. Well, this syntax where it has the hierarchy and the level dot current member dot name, that identifies the viewer that I want to take the value in that plant or in that row for that plant and pass that along as a value in a parameter to the detail. All right, so let's switch over to viewer and show some examples of this. This is viewer 7.0, latest general availability release. Let's go ahead and I'm going to pick a view. We'll start with the customer review. So this is my kind of my high-level view. And this is going to show me some information. First, I've got a parameter set up for this particular view. I'm going to select a customer, Good Foods Western, and go ahead and run that. So again, standard viewer view. I've got a lot of information here. I've got a graph or a chart down at the bottom that provides more information, obviously in a graphical presentation. But one of the things I've set up in this view is the status or sales status. And this is a comparison in this particular example of looking at an expected or a target value for this current month versus what I'm showing on average for the last 3 months. And in our demo world, our current month is September. So this is looking at an average over the last few months. So in this particular case, again, if I hover over this is that pop-up expression, and I'll go into that in a minute. But this is showing what it's comparing against, so expected sales versus my average, and then giving me what the value is. So in this particular case, it's 13.7. So that's a good thing. If I go down to this product brand for this customer, I've got a little red indicator there. Now I'm at a negative 26. Not so good. So what this allows me now to do is I can click on the icon, and that's going to take me to a detailed view for this particular customer. And brand in this case. So a couple things here. One, it spawns a new tab or a new window, which is nice because now I can drag this around and be able to see both summary and detail at the same time. So that's certainly one advantage to that. The other is, as we've talked about, I can pass information from one view to another. So in this particular case, I started my overview or my summary view with selecting a particular customer, 150180, and that's being passed as a parameter over to this view. And then I clicked on this particular row, which had the product brand. So behind the scenes now I'm passing the product brand code for SuperSuite and moving that in over here as well. So now this information, this detail view, now shows me more information about that combination. So the product brand and the customer sold to. It's showing me the last 12 months of history, and also breaking it down into various different metrics or different KPIs about that combination. So in this case, cases and cost per case and all sorts of information that the user might want to see in more detail versus what they're getting up in the main screen or main view itself. You can easily click off on that one and go back to my summary view. I could click on another one. Let's look at what's going on with this first choice. And now I get more information about that. So how do we accomplish that? I'm going to go ahead and open up the file or the View Explorer and show information about this particular view. I'm going to go down to the sales status calculated measure, and let's bring up the properties for that. Double click on that. Let's make this a little bigger. And start to go through some of these properties. So caption, obviously that's the column heading. It's a calculated type. And then I have an expression. So in this particular case, I'm doing the calculation, and that's what's going to drive the value of the indicator that shows up in that column. I'm not going to display the actual value. I could. In this particular example, as we hover over that, I'm giving, as part of the pop-up expression, and we'll show that in a minute, we're actually showing the value of the result of that calculation, so the 13.7%. Image, no, because I'm going to use the image based on the next thing, the conditional format. So I've got conditional format set to yes. Let's click and show how that's defined. So just a standard conditional format that we use, specifying certain ranges of values, and based on that range, what icon do I want to show? So if it's greater than 10%, I'm good, green. If it's less than negative 10%, I'm going to show that red diamond. Anything else is going to show a gray circle. So this is a real handy way of displaying or indicating what icon you want to have displayed. It's much easier for a user to select that. The other option that you have is to go back to, on the expression, is to indicate a location or an object within the viewer folder where viewer is installed. So you can provide users with information about different icons that are available in that folder, but certainly they're not going to sign on to the server and find that information. So using a conditional format, it's a pretty nice way of allowing the user to select what icons they want to have appear here. The pop-up expression, like we talked about, this is a combination of just free-form text, expected sales versus average sales. But then you can also include as part of the variables what the value is for that particular measure in that calculated column or calculated measure. So here, this is where we're able to see the actual percentage for that calculated measure. And then finally, the hyperlink. So we turn that on, obviously. Go ahead and click on here. And so let's go through the different components that we've got. As I mentioned earlier, the first part is indicating the viewer location, and then the viewWindow.aspx object. And then here's my view ID. So the detail view that we're going to look at, and I'll show you that in a minute, is view ID 7028. Then I have a series of parameters that detail view is set up to accept. So we saw that we were passing it the brand and the customer. Had I drilled in my summary view to things like store and market, and I clicked on a row, that information in addition would be passed over to the detail view. And then as I showed before, it's that current member.name portion of the hierarchy and the level that passes the actual value that's displayed in that row and or column. So let me click on that detail view, go back over that, and let's open that view up. Again, up at the top, if you click on the very top node, down at the bottom here, you'll see the view ID. So in this case, it's 7028. So that's the view ID that I use in my hyperlink. And then also, I've got my parameter groups. So here's where you've got the parameter group, or the different dimensions that you want to pass as parameters into this view. And that's where we've got the brand, and we've got the customer, and the store, and the market. The order that you pass them in the hyperlink isn't all that critical, but you certainly need to have them listed. And again, what's defined in the hyperlink for the parameter name needs to be exact. Okay? So let's look at a couple other examples. I'm going to open up my favorites again. We looked at the customer review. Let's look at a different one called plant operating efficiency. Again, a lot of information up at a summary level. This particular view is breaking down different OEE metrics based on plant and then department within the plant, and showing that percentage or that value over time. There's a detail value or a link here. Again, utilizing the pop-up expression, I can now click on this to get to more detail about that particular plant. And again, as you can see, there's a vast amount of information. And this is showing all the different components that go into calculating that value over here on the right-hand side. And so this view does a couple things. One, it provides all of these additional metrics that go in, again, to the calculation. And in this case, it's also breaking it down by month as well. So a couple things that were passed, and we passed the plant over. So I want to show the plant from where I clicked on the main view. Again, if we were to open this up, look at the View Explorer, let's scroll down and pick up the detail and look at that. Again, we've got a calculated, or in this case, it's a distinct calculated measure. And what a distinct calculated measure does is it sits either to the beginning, or in this case, it's at the end of the row. I have an expression again. I'm not showing the value of that, and again, for the indicator, I'm utilizing the conditional format. So in this case, this happens to be a global conditional format, which is a nice way of doing it. I can highlight that row. Down at the bottom, I can click this indicator, and that shows me details about that. So it's similar to what we had before, but just a different icon. Maybe as a user, or I want to set this up differently. Maybe I want to have a different set of icons. I could do that as well. Switch that over, whatever the preference is. And then finally, the hyperlink. Again, similar to what we had before. This one's very simple because I've only got my one parameter that I want to pass over. But again, I've got my server viewer location. The view ID that I want to pass or call is 7026. And then I've got my one parameter that I want to pass over to my detail view. Okay. So one other example that I've got to show today, just a different way of showing attribute information about a dimension. So I've got a very summarized view here, just showing store sales over a time period, both amounts and units. I've got my different stores or ship to locations. But I've got a hyperlink here to get into more detail about the particular customer sold to or shipped to in this case that I want to get information about. I'm going to go ahead and click on that just to show you what this does. Get this guy out of the way here. So what this allows me to do, this view, all this view does, the store information, is displays the different attribute or pickup information for that particular store that I clicked on that I have pickup information for. Doesn't show me any metrics per se, dollars or units or anything like that, but it's a nice way of displaying the different pickup information or attribute information without having to include all of these pickup fields on that same row. Kind of clutters up the information. Again, I might have a summary view that gives me maybe an indicator or conditional format or something that says, hey, wait a minute, this particular store or ship to location is a little bit low compared to average. In that case, I want to click on it, get some additional information, and maybe make a phone call. If the others are okay and I don't have any issues with the information that I'm seeing at a summary level, then I just move on. I don't need to see any of this attribute information. So just another different way of presenting more detailed information. In this case, it happens to be about dimensions, but a different way of showing more detailed information about specific values. Again, on this one, if I were to open up the View Explorer, move this over so that we can see it. Again, very straightforward columns of information. These are all the attribute fields that I'm presenting in the view, and then my parameter group. And as you can see up in the URL, so this is the URL that got called from that main view, and here's my parameter, my store, and passing it the store number, or the ship to number in this case. And there's a number of other parameters that can be included in your hyperlink as well that control whether or not when the view is displayed like this, whether or not you see things like the icons up at the top, the toolbars, the View Explorer, whether you want that displayed when the view is run or not, those kinds of things. And those are all documented in the online help text as well.